Hello, and thank you all for joining us as we welcome our speaker, Bernard Trainor. A quick shout out to fellow member and friend Richard Turner, who encouraged me to make this invitation, who is sadly not online with us as he's actually in Chad. So I don't know, there may be an internet cafe where he can sign in, but I doubt it. Anyway, Bernard Trainor needs little introduction for many of you, I am sure. His mouth-wateringly beautiful landscapes have appeared in all major gardening magazines across the world. Two books allow closer inspection and comparison: Land Prints, published in 2013, and another monograph, Bernard Trainor Ground Studio Landscapes, in 2019. Australian by birth, he was raised on the Mornington Peninsula along Australia's rugged southeastern coast, which shares many geographical and botanical parallels with the landscape where he has made his home since 2002. After studying horticulture and garden design in Melbourne, he won a scholarship to further his education in England, attending the English Gardening School and doing an internship at Beth Chatto Gardens before heading to California. He set up Ground Studio, and the company has over 20 years of design experience with studios in Monterey, Santa Barbara, and Napa. It is considered one of America's most masterful landscape practices. A talented polymath, Bernard is now engaged with architectural design, painting, furniture design, and sculpture, as well as gardening every day. He is most happy at home, which is also his laboratory, which he sees as an intersection of art, design, and science. Today, he's going to talk to us about the research and experimentation in his own garden that in turn influences the designs at Ground Studio. Thank you so much for being with us, Bernard. We are excited to hear you speak and to learn and to be inspired by your talent. If you'd like to share your screen now.
Right. Let me go there. Oops. Let me just, there we go.
Perfect.
And now I'll just play. Is that full screen for everybody?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you for the introduction, Angela. Do you hear me okay? Is this loud enough?
Yes, absolutely fine.
Perfect. So yeah, I've been a member of the Mediterranean Garden Society, and I was on the Northern California board. I think I still am. We just don't meet anymore, which I'd love to get back to meetings one day. I've lost touch, but originally I think I was on the board because of Richard Turner, and here I am today because of Richard Turner. So he just keeps coming back and forward into my life. And that really brings up a point that one of the incredible things that happened to me, because as Angela said, I'm originally from Australia, then I worked in England, and then I ended up in California by chance. And it's really been California where my career has happened as far as landscape design, landscape architecture. Northern California has been incredible for me. It's just been one thing after the other as far as my development into what I love, which is gardens and landscapes, and just continues to be the gift that keeps on giving. But early days, I had strong influences in Australia. Roger and Gwen Elliott were real influences. Edna Walling, Fiona Brockhoff. And then in England, I didn't know who Beth Chatto was before I went to England. So I accidentally ended up on her doorstep at the recommendation of John Brooks. And just a little bit, the rest is history. I just needed that little sweetener to come in, and it did. And I didn't know what I was doing. And it just continues to fuel what I do. Beth's influence is definitely the most significant influence on me. And, just understanding where you are in the world with your design, the context, plant choices, etc. All of those things that I carry with me today. So when I arrived in California, I was very, very lucky I'm going to miss some people here, but I walked into a hotbed. It was in the mid 90s, and I walked into a hotbed of the Dick Turners, um, great nurserymen, Randy Baldwin, Dave Frost, Nevin Smith. Um, I feel like I'm going to miss some here. There's many, many more than that. But who would just took me under their wing and started to influence me, particularly with California plants. Um, and Dick Turner was holding these Gardening Under Mediterranean Skies conferences at the time. And so again, I just walked into meeting a lot of incredible people at these conferences, at nurseries, and also really giving, or I should say, humble other landscape architects and designers who encouraged me. And so I just came here at a really good time. Had I come today, I've noticed there's not as many conferences, there's not as many nurserymen around. In fact, nurseries are closing, which I think is a real issue. And so I don't know what would have happened had I arrived more recently. But timing is everything, as you all know, in our lives. So I got very lucky with that. So everything that you see that I've worked on here have been on the shoulder of giants and had a lot of support from people here, and have spent so coming on 30 years in California, which I realize exceeds my time in Australia now. I still, in a strange way, see myself as Australian, but California is the one that just keeps giving to me, as I said. But I thought I would start the talk with just showing some of the ground studio work, the work that I do with my team here. And I'm just going to show you the range of work and the regions that we work. This first image is a project we got to work on many, many years ago. I think it would be coming on between 15 and 20 years ago. And the architect on this project, Jonathan Feldman, this is one of the early projects with him where he just had a lot of faith in me as far as the way I handled landscape around buildings. And this project is east of where I live here in a place called Hollister. And it was originally a walnut ranch, not in this particular section of the property, but in another section. And then somebody bought the property and wanted to build a residence at the base of this slope here. And so some of these projects, I was learning a lot about how to work in different regions of California. Very, very lucky. One by one, project by project, we just continue to learn. This is a photograph of my team. I think we currently have around 25 or 27 people, as Angela mentioned, spread from Napa through Monterey down to Santa Barbara. And we have projects mostly in California. We try to stick to California. But we do have a few out-of-state projects as well in other states. In this photograph, there is now 4 other owners in Ground Studio. So I am just a part of Ground Studio. I changed the name around, I think it was 7 years ago. It used to be called Bernard Trainor and Associates, and changed it to Ground Studio as a more holistic name that wasn't tied directly to me, so the other owners could transition and carry on the legacy of the firm, is the hope. And so that was very strategic. So the other partners in the firm is Ben Langford, David Leroy, Johnson Bullard, and Chris Merritt. And the reason we have spread geographically is because we kept getting inquiries from those areas. We weren't chasing work there, it just came. And now Chris Merritt runs the Santa Barbara office, David runs the Napa office, and Johnson and Ben run the Monterey office. So I get to do things like this, do talks to the Mediterranean Garden Society, and things I didn't have the time to do not long ago. This gives a range of the regions of California. Most of our work is at the extreme west. side of California, and mostly spread between where you see the North Coast and the Southern Coast. We do work down into Los Angeles now as well. So everywhere from our main points are Los Angeles, Santa Barbara. Then we kind of skip to Monterey region, Big Sur region, a little bit in Santa Cruz, north, a lot of work in the Bay Area, San Francisco south and north, a little bit east of San Francisco as well. And then you'll see images, quite a bit of work up in Napa Valley and that general area, Sonoma as well. We have, the rainfall, as you may realize, we have everything from 5 inches or less in the south and east, all the way up to about 120 inches plus in the north. So radical differences in rainfall, and also these mountain ranges and valleys that separate regions and change the temperature, from extreme cold to extreme heat in the summer. So growing up in Australia definitely benefited me with, some of this knowledge. And then I always say learning the classical principles of garden design in England was essential to my foundation as well, even though I really struggled with it because I would have arguments with my professors because I wanted to do things more progressive and more modern. And then what I realized in retrospect was, wow, I needed a foundation, understanding the history of landscape design before I just start plowing forward. So it's very good to slow me down. And then, of course, arriving in California, it's very progressive, has an incredible history of garden design and architecture design, particularly 20th century, early 20th century and on. So I'm really privileged to be working with people here who really understand that history. This gives an idea of when I said we work mostly to the west, north and south. Yeah, a lot of the projects are within a couple of hours of the coastline is very typical. We do have projects further afield and, as I said, in other states as well. I think these dots on the map might be 20 years out of place, 20 years out of date, I should say. So there's a lot more yellow dots now, particularly because I have 4 other partners who can help with the workload. Within this, as I said, we do a lot of coastal range type projects. And this is a project in Big Sur near Garraparta is the name of the beach. And this is me, again, probably close to 20 years ago, 15 to 20 years ago, meeting with the landscape contractor on site. And we do so much of this. And, these are things I learned from Beth Chatto, is just be there and just look and listen, be curious. And then we always start the projects with this very clear analysis. We always say we try to create what we call dirty sheets, because we feel that like design has gone in a way where everything's so neat and tidy and copy and pasted and 3D modeled. There's nothing like a pencil and paper just to write what was your initial thoughts on site. So I'm the old fogey at Ground Studio now, but I am very demanding about our site analysis. And this first meeting is so critical. And so these were the drawings done with the landscape contractor and my team. And then these are more images of the project here. I'm just going to get rid of the view because I've got the wrong view here. It's sitting in the image. There we go. So yeah, this is that same project in Garraparta. And you can see, I showed a map of the ecotones or the ecoregions of California, but you could break that down and do a map just on a single site like this. And that's the type of thing we do. We zone plantings because you can see there's a riparian area and then there's an area at the top that's got 0 soil, completely different rainfall, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm lucky to live in an area, Monterey County, where this is accentuated, and we have places like Big Sur, Point Lobos, Santa Lucia Mountains with these extreme radical differences, even on a single site, which gets me excited. And then how that then translates into the projects of Ground Studio. This is a project on the part, you can see this on our website, called Wind and Sea in Big Sur. And very far down in Big Sur, it's you travel along the Santa Lucia, west of the Santa Lucia Mountains, about an hour and a half from Carmel down to this site. What a challenge this site was, because all of that stone you see had to come down from the road to build these walls and these habitable spaces, because I had convinced the client he could sit down there and enjoy it, and I would get to plant many of these California native plants. So a lot of influencing clients about what to use. And, John Greenlee, who's on the call, has been an incredible inspiration with educating me about grasses. You'll see in our projects, we use a lot of grasses, and John's been a leader in that. This is from above. The photograph on the left is taken from the house. So you could see there was this wonderful opportunity to play with abstracted patterns, almost like in a Noguchi way or a Picasso way, where, overlapping curves that would then, become seating walls down in this area. And so I was champing at the bit when I got this project, because I'd never had another coastal project like it. So it was a very big canvas. It was a couple of acres, and strong negotiation on budget, because I just wanted to, he said, well, couldn't we do part of the property? And I said, no, not really. Let's do it all. So I had to convince him to let me do this big canvas, and still in place, beautiful stonework by the stonemasons with local stone. On the right, there is this beautiful yarrow that I absolutely love, Achillea Sonoma Coast. And some of the carex, we have Carex praegracilis and Carex panza are the predominant grasses down in this amphitheater area where he has musical events. The opposite of that, I wanted to show contrasting projects. This is up in the Bay Area, a courtyard garden around a 1929 Monterey colonial building. So we did all of the redo on the landscape on this with olives, rosemaries, existing palms, roses, etc. So extremely contrasting projects, which again goes back to Beth, like, when in Rome, do what you will. So for me, very much about context. I never get tied to a single style. And you'll see that here again. This is a project in Carmel, very close to me on the coast. And I had just come back from Andalusia, as you can tell. And so it was just all about water runnels and Mediterranean plants. You can see the convolvulus and the euphorbias and the lavenders and the rosemaries. So, really going back to my roots, that's the sort of plant palette I started with. And it's become quite different over the years, as you'll see in some of the other projects. We do work on these unbelievable projects. This project is in a place called Santa Lucia Preserve. And everything, all the grassland that you see in the foreground there was all planted by us. The site was heavily graded in order to get the house on the site. So we did a combination of planting livestock material and also seeding. And then this again is with this architect, Jonathan Feldman, who has been such a supporter of our work. But you can see why he likes us, because he basically always wants to put clients that close to being in the landscape. So you can see all the doors slide away, go into the walls, and basically you're outside. And some of his clients will often ask me, like, what should we do as far as outdoor dining and arbors and pavilions? And I said, well, once you're in a Jonathan Feldman house, you are outside. So I try to convince them not to do too much outside, because he basically just opens up the doors and you're in a living pavilion, basically. And one thing I wanted to show with this was, so you see, it all looks about the aesthetic on this, but this is this house. And Jonathan and I came up with a strategy early on for capturing all the water on the site from the driveway, all the drainage water, the roof water. It's called butterfly house, and these roofs come back and they fill the tanks that you can see in the left corner. And then the water that we didn't capture, you can see towards the middle of the screen where the blue arrows run through, that surface flows out onto the grasslands that I just showed you in front of the house. So we were very strategic with slowing down the water. So with these architects, we're doing more and more of this. Like, obviously, we're trying to balance, the existing landscape, the civil engineering, like where the water's going. We're often capturing grey water from the inside of the house as well, where we are, very careful about our selection of plants as far as low water use and expressing seasonality, which I will show some of later. But, with these houses, whilst they look pretty, they're also functioning and working in many ways that we have plans for, or have a vision for early on in the project. And luckily, I get on the projects day one with these architects. Like, some of them, I'm at the first meeting where they go to the site. Another one of these where this was a project that really got me a lot of publicity, almost accidentally, and done a long while ago. And it was in the New York Times. And I did two key things on this project. I turned up and the architect had the pool against the house. It was like, 10 foot of paving and then the pool right in front of the living area, the dining area, kitchen, etc. And at the first meeting, the clients were really straightforward. And I said, well, what's your key interest in the landscape? And they said, well, we're competitive swimmers in our age group. So, we're really interested in mostly the pool and using the pool. And I said, well, why don't we put the pool out there so you're swimming in a meadow? And they literally said yes on the spot. They said, good idea. I never had to try to convince them. So I hinged this pool out here and did these stairs down to it and a small amount of paving. But then we had to do all of this planting. So if you look at before shots of this project, it's all soil. And we had to move a lot of soil. We had to hide the pool equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some aesthetics at play. But I just, said, why don't I just put you out in the meadow so you can have a relationship with it instead of it being behind your pool, be in it. And never had to argue for it, never had to convince them. It was just too easy. And then the next thing, it was in the New York Times, and then everyone wanted a pool in a meadow after that. Other projects in Napa Valley, you can see the proximity, that we experience sometimes in these Mediterranean climates of agriculture to garden, which is incredibly interesting to me. So yeah, this is a project up in a place called St. Helena. And you can see this really interesting play of shapes and forms, not necessarily going with the vines, but at a diagonal. And, what we had to do with these, you can see these little gardens start to appear in these little shapes between different parts of the building. And then this is what it's like when you're at ground level entering the garden. This project is on our website as well. It's called Bale Lane. Wonderful projects. You can see in the distance the hills behind had burned in one of the Napa fires, of which there have been many in recent years. And we're luckily on the valley floor here, and there was a fire break and sort of a zoning whereby, if you have extreme conditions, fires are still coming into even these areas now, as you've heard recently. But luckily on this one, we had a pretty good defensible zone. And you never know, because you can see the building materials could be flammable in certain situations. And again, what it's like to be down. You saw the above view, but there's the vines to the left, pool house over, where you see straight through. And then, of course, you just make sure you're wearing your swimming costume as they're pruning the grapevines, right? They're right there. other shots, getting to work on these magnificent projects. The architects on this are Annie and Luke Wade, who mostly work up in that area, and we continue to work with them on other projects as well. This is Santa Lucia Preserve again. And again, you can see the influence of the grasses and what I mentioned about John and other nurseries where, some of these projects are about making gardens, and some of them, to me, are about extending landscapes. So for me, in this particular case, this is just my personal opinion, a traditional garden would just look silly to me with this background. So a lot of our work is still creating interesting plant combinations and obviously hardscapes that, have a sense of craft and artistry, but a little more about what's there. And I have no issue with that. One of my early projects that was similar to this, where the clients really trusted me with this approach, because there wasn't that many projects happening like this where you were restoring grasslands and bringing in native trees and looking at local wildflowers, etc., because everyone's like, why would you do that, spend a lot of money and do that, was the attitude, particularly for the first 10 years that I arrived here. And one of the early projects, the most trusting client who let me go all the way on a similar project to this, after about 5 years of work and, carefully placing every indigenous grass and carefully pruning every single native oak tree, and carefully making native grass pathways, et cetera, one of their best friends drove up the driveway after I'd finished the landscape, and they said, now that you've finished the house, we actually know some good landscape architects that you could do a garden with. And that was at first insulting, and then I thought, what a compliment. So it was so natural, they couldn't really see that anything had been done, I guess. And you can see again the artistry here, like always working with paving patterns. The interplay of nature and man-made is really a huge interest of me. The walls that you see there are done out of Pise, like a rammed earth, and concrete paving with local gravels, and Quercus agrifolia is the tree, and then a really wide mix of grasses. I want to say there's probably about between 7 and 10 grasses that make up that grassland. Slightly different approach also in Napa Valley, where we sort of playing with that back and forward between Chinese pistache trees, South African restios, Chondropedilum tectorum El Campo, with different local manzanitas, which is, we have Arctostaphylos Carmel Sur, we have Arctostaphylos Emerald Carpet, and then in the distance, you will see we also have, I think we have Cecularia Greenlee and also another Carex, but you can see we brought in these beautiful boulders as well. So just turning it more and more into nature meets art, and these clients are just letting me and my team compose more and more, which is a really privileged place to be, but we've paid our dues and we're just going with it. And then just getting to see these families. This is a young family, phenomenal family. Sharon, the mother, is an amazing artist, and Mike is amazing in his field, and he had the highest standards for what this landscape could be and pushed me further than I thought I could be pushed, honestly. And he was right on many things. So these great collaborations with clients. You just stay open to just doing it, staying curious and doing it in ways where you're listening really closely to their lifestyle and letting that be the thing. And here they are with the kids who are getting older now. During this project, they also built this beautiful white work studio, which is barely there. And then this swimming pool out on the edge, which is just so dreamy. one of the best pools we've ever done to reflect the landscape. And basically, again, it's a lot about what's behind versus what's in front. And there it is, you can see. And we did things on this pool I didn't think could be done. But again, the client, Mike, was very exacting and precise. And he just kept saying, no, we're going to go further. We're going to go further. And he took me for a ride. We had great ideas on what to do. And then I feel, added details that were beyond what we'd done before. I got no issue when the best idea comes from somebody else. And then this leads me to my own garden, which is kind of the opposite, I guess, of what I've been showing you. So this is my playground, or as Angela said, it is my laboratory for art, sculpture, painting, interior design. Like I'm always working on the interiors, like the never-ending making furniture, shelves with people I work with. But of course, the biggest thing is I'm just a plantaholic, like probably everybody on the call, and I can't get enough of it. And that's what makes me the happiest every day. This garden has got me through some really tough times, more than any other garden I've ever been involved in. So I'm always just so grateful to be here. Like there's not a single day where I don't wake up and just think, how did I arrive here? How lucky am I? So sort of start with that. It's not that I'm trying to be grateful. It's just that I genuinely am. I'm just so lucky to end up in this place. And you can see this is where the plant addiction starts. I guess I call it a laboratory to try things. And really what I'm trying is, well, the first thing I should say is, so I have no automated irrigation on the garden. So I made a commitment to that originally, and I'll show you some summer dormancy that happens in some of the images. But basically, I'm just relying on, I water it the first, if I plant in fall, I more or less just water it a couple of times and then leave it. And then if I break my rules and plant in summer, I will water it until the fall, just hand water it deeply, but not very often, just by hose. And then this slope hasn't been watered in, other than the new plants that go in, I want to say about 12 years. So it's about 12 years of growth. I have 3 different terraces in the garden. The very top you'll see is very rocky with a thin soil profile with San Franciscan stone. This middle terrace is the most photographable because this is where all the soil came down off the rock, and I actually have a thicker soil profile. And then in my extreme lower property, the soil is the most hydrophobic because it's filled with Pinus radiata and Quercus agrifolia. And when the rains come, it can sometimes take about 3 months before it will even penetrate the surface, depending on the type of rainfall. So I have all these different ecosystems, as I was describing earlier in California, but in one garden, which is fascinating to me. This is the entry, sort of a parking area, and then you go through that gate, and you can see the Pinus radiata below. That's where it drops down, and the Quercus agrifolia, and then those mountains in the distance are the Santa Lucia Mountains, which I get to look at every day and watch the transition of the seasons and the summer dormancy. That's so fascinating to me. And I just keep creeping further and further into the driveway. You can see I have Westringas, Manzanitas, Leptospermum, Bescanarias, dwarf olives. That hedge on the left there, the kind of rounded hedge, is a really interesting olive called Skylark. And it's a thicker, shorter olive that I think came from California, maybe from Nevin Smith, if I have that right, but somebody might be able to correct me on that. And then I'm also trying on the right side of the driveway is Pittosporum crassifolium. So I'm just trying like what works, what doesn't. I'm planting straight into gravel. This was jackhammered asphalt, was the original driveway material. So there's still asphalt in place. I didn't take it all out. So every time I want to plant, we're jackhammering a little more asphalt out, like where those Beskin areas are on the left, they're in asphalt. And then, again, the more soil, areas here, you can see I can get slightly more season out of them where they got deeper root systems. They don't dry out as quickly. Interestingly, the top of my property on the thin soil profile has been just the last 5 years become one of the best areas. But I would say it took 7 or 8 years for them to find root fully where they started to explode. They just sat and it was pretty hard to watch. I didn't take anybody up there because I didn't want them to think that their garden was going to look like that. And now I've got 2 clients who are doing no irrigation gardens because of this garden. So hoping more and more goes that way. I also paint on the property. As I mentioned earlier, I have an art studio in the back, and I also paint outside. These paintings were done fairly recently. It's for a art exhibit or a gallery exhibit in a space I'm calling Sand Garden, and it's in an area called Seaside. And I'm trying to explore what these sand dunes were like that are now, of course, paved over and built over. So I'm trying to create memories of what this might have looked like. And so I've abstracted leaves, colors, flowers, and amplified it up to these very large paintings, what might be 1-inch flowers, if that makes sense. So I'm just doing this push and pull to accentuate visibility for humans. And you can see the sketches and the weird things I'm doing on the left. I'm just doing that daily, essentially. Someday I go very seamlessly from gardening to painting at the drop of a hat. If I see a color like this, if I see things in the garden, it could immediately be like, okay, I'm weeding 1 minute and then I've got a canvas in front of me the next minute, or vice versa. Or sometimes I think I'm walking out to the studio to paint and I spend the whole day gardening. I never make it to the studio, and that's just fine. You can see all these wonderful plants, the euphorbias, aeoniums, crassulas, aloes, cotinus, ceanothus. But that rocky profile you see on the right, that's my upper property. That's what I'm dealing with. And that ceanothus has taken 10 years to look like that. Whereas if I planted that into a deep soil and irrigated it, could look like that in 3 years. Just the colors and textures, just some days with the light play are just unbelievable. So you can see here rosemaries, phlomis, agaves, Chinese pistache, olives, cotyledons, etc. I would say I've been on a real run with cotyledons and aeoniums. I just can't get enough of them because I just keep discovering ones that just perform really well in my garden. And anything that doesn't, like anything that's just suspect, I'm pretty ruthless about just pulling it out and throwing it away and not treating the garden as like, we'll make it work. It's telling me what it can do, and that's what I do. Some of the close-ups, really, I've realized on the north side of my house where it's a little shaded, how drought tolerant these strawberries are with chondropetalum and aeoniums. And this pathway is the one that leads out to my studio. So you can see the influence of paintings, of the abstracted paintings. And I'm playing with this method at the moment whereby I'm coming in and scraping with plastic scrapers these large bodies of paint to create contours and creating these crevices, doing my whole painting, and then pouring paint over the top of it, thin down paint with many different mediums. When I say paint, thinned materials, because it's not just paint, and letting it sit into those crevices as it might in a landscape to understand where water and soil are and why things are that color. So I'm playing with that with paintings at the moment. You can see that inside my house. The plants do continue inside, like all of your houses, I'm sure, that we can't get enough. But you can see some of these paintings inside my house that I've been exploring, again, the topography of the painting and the colors of summer dormancy, and celebrating it, trying to enjoy it. And it's been very interesting watching people look at my paintings and try to understand them. But it's mostly for me to understand, and then it's just a take it or leave it situation. If it influences somebody, great, but otherwise I'm just staying on my course. Beautiful opportunities with amazing combinations here of ceanothus. The one on the right is Valley Violet. And the one on the left, even though it's photographed really differently, is Julia Phelps. But I can never capture that color in a camera. I'll have to ask Carol or John how they do that. But I've combined it with jade plants, different coffee berries, rhamnus, and then Quercus agrifolia, and Ioniums and olives. So, really exploring these Mediterranean climate plants and how we can combine them as well, really effectively. You can see it there again. I have Bescanaria alba on the left, Pittosporums, olives, cotyledons. This ceanothus is Joyce Coulter, which is one of my favorites. Absolutely spectacular flowers. Flowering now, this was probably taken a week ago. So really enjoying all the fresh foliage because we've had rainfall. And then different regions of my garden. On the left is my lower property, where I told you it's the toughest of the tough, hydrophobic, etc. And so there is echiums. There is a beautiful Arctostaphylos, one of my favorite, called Warren Roberts, who I actually met on the Northern California Mediterranean Garden Society. And Sean will probably attest to this. We used to just sit there and listen to Warren's stories. One of the most brilliant people I've ever met. But anyway, we have this great Arctostaphylos named after him. And then what else do I have? Arbutus unido, rosemaries, more Ioniums, euphorbias, and on the right is probably one of my easier areas to garden as far as non-irrigation, and it's directly outside my bedroom, luckily, so I wake up to that every morning with backlighting. This is interesting to me because I started to play with, you can see this is the profile of goes from no soil to deposited soil at the base of this slope, and not very much soil though. So underneath the soil surface here, the rock is probably less than 6 inches down. And this again took me forever for this to become like this. It was really struggling. But again, I just am trying to see what will work at the base of this slope with no additional irrigation. And then, of course, the issue is in winter, when the rains come, they pour over this rock and flood the lower area, and the plants nearly die from being overwatered. And then about 6 months later or 7 months later, they nearly die from lack of water. So it's this push and pull of how much can we struggle together here. More paintings. This is outside my studio for this exhibit called Sand Garden that will be coming up, where I'm in an old auto parts factory. And I have a client who owns the factory, so he's giving it to me for 6 months to do a 6-month pop-up of this exhibit. So like everything, you just find your opportunities. But you can see here on the left, that's where I go from my biggest area of soil, or my most thick area of soil, to my upper area. And when I used to look up on this slope above where those stairs are, I would again say it took 5 to 7 years for those plants to even grow together. So it's taken so long, but I'll guarantee you one thing, they'll be the last plants standing on the site if anything ever goes wrong. because they're the ones that are most resilient, no question. I just had to suffer with them. There was many times where I was almost taking a hose bib up there and cheating. And then looking down on the left there, you can see I look across to the Santa Lucia Mountains and Carmel Bay and Point Lobos. There's my dog Tigger. But I have this dreamy view. So anywhere I'm gardening, I also have this incredible view out to the mountains. So while I'm dealing with climate conditions in my garden, I'm also seeing the effects of that basically mirrored back at me. You know, if one of my plants is struggling and I'm like, what's going on here? I just look out and I go, oh, I see. Yeah, the grasslands are drying out, etc. So it's just this constant collaboration with nature. And then that's on the right, that's looking down towards my bedroom. So I wake up in that little moment, which is looking east. Summer dormancy. I'm trying to take more and more of these photographs. I am in Carmel, which is a more benign climate, honestly, than most areas of California. So, but I still believe there's ways to do this. You have to adapt. We have to adapt our thinking and be using even more resilient plants in even drier climates. But, you know, there is spots on my property here where it is very, very dry. And I did have temperatures up to about the highest it would get here on the most extreme case is around 92 to 95 degrees. So it doesn't get too hot and it doesn't get too cold in winter, but it can get very dry actually. But you can see here that's Crassula multicava on the right and Aeoniums shriveling up and obviously Jades on the left, but fairly extreme dry conditions with very thin soil profile. I'm trying to do more combinations that take this into account. So use it as a tool to, in the same way, when you think about it, if I think of like one person, Pierre Oldorf, and he's like, okay, let's express dead flowers in winter. Well, we just do the reverse of that and let's see what happens. Also painting and watercoloring. With that in mind, I'm trying to understand these colors and celebrate them. And these are seen as colors with tension, drama. But if I think of a garden and I'm like, well, I love tension and I love drama. So I'm like trying to really understand these colors in my paintings and watercolors as they come up. Painting out of my color comfort zone, I guess. That's inside my house. Another painting that was done around this time as the seasons were turning. That's my daughter and my dog there. She's at college now, finishing up. And again, different seasons, different colors, but those paintings I just showed you were done with summer dormancy in mind, but could equally be thought of as, hey, you know, this is in winter as these are flowering. They're flowering right now, this cotyledon. I think it's called Blue Wave. And then I'm also taking this inside as plants are decaying and drying. I take them in and I live with them. I'm like, all right, what does this mean? And try to understand colors of all seasons and textures of all seasons. And how that applies to, that's a view from my garden on the right. So those colors are happening at different times throughout the year. And also with this beautiful single shot of all these bluish greens, glaucous colors up to the Chinese pistache. Just that single moment to me is so beautiful, like a cloud lit up. Going back to how I take everything inside, you can see that's my dining table on the left with quince. I've got a bronze sculpture from a friend. I've got a dried Buddha's hand citrus. I'm reading Carl Blosfeld. I've got a Scandinavian friend who sent me that tapestry in the top left. And then that book, you can see Long Window, is just written by a friend of mine. So everything just comes as one. It's like one artistic life, whether I'm inside or outside. And you can see the tissue paper at the top. I'm about to do some acrylic paintings on my dining table, which I don't do as much anymore. You can see that on the middle image, top. That's my dining table looking down my hallway with some of my paintings on the wall with a sunset coming into the house. just waiting for all of those moments and just celebrating. And the one on the right is a beautiful dried color, what I still call Calocephalus brownii, Australian June plant. That's the walk to my art studio out in the distance on the left. So you can see why sometimes I don't make it to the art studio. I start doing other things. And then sometimes I don't make it back from the art studio. I just have to see how it goes. And just unbelievable, like these are the high moments, you know, for all the work and all the planting and all the think what I call managing, just collaborating with nature, I guess. Like I'm always letting it flow. And I know Beth Chatto would always say that, like some of the best moments were the plant that's seeded in between everything she did. That's really true of what I'm doing. And just keep experimenting and trying different combinations. There's a couple of things I see on this image on the left that I've done in the last year that's going to totally change that scene. Because what's not showing up as much is it looks like it's all succulents, but in actual fact, what it is now is there's a lot more Rhamnus, Myrcine africana, dwarf olives, rosemary. There's a few others, pittosporums. So in the future, I think it's going to be at least 50% plus shrub garden versus succulent garden. So in a way, there's the succulents grow really fast and they fill space while the shrubs are growing out. I have ceanothus in these areas as well now. How that influences painting and form in the description I showed you earlier. Always not a single image, but just memories from gardens over 50 years is what these paintings represent. Summer dormancy on the right, which I know you all know when things just turn back, and then what it looks like that exact scene on the left in once the rains come. Those colors coming inside on the left is some paintings I did with, you know, these green, gray, blue, glaucous colors. And then I experimented with these very distinct lines where it transitions on from that to this bleached color that is what I think of as summer dormancy. And on the right, that's in a client's garden that I did, or sorry, house that I did a garden for. And they acquired two of my paintings in their bedroom, which is just nice to know they look out on the garden or at the paintings. Wonderful light sneaking through. This was taken recently, and that's the sun coming in from the west in the background. And just, it's very lush at the moment because we've actually just had some rains, and I think we're getting some today as well. And then I think this is the final image, just looking from the house, the upper terrace to the lower terrace, and again across to Santa Lucia Mountains. And to the right there is Point Lobos peeking out. And I think that's it. Thank you everyone for attending. And here I am for questions. Should I stop share, Angela?
Yes, do that. Thank you, Bernard. Wonderful.
All right.
So I saw many questions coming through on the chat, and I think they're quite interesting ones. So I'd like to obviously thank you for this amazing presentation, but let's answer people's questions, shall we? So Maggie, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Angela. Yeah, ready to go. There are obviously some comments that say what a wonderful and inspiring presentation it was. So thank you for that. And then there's some very specific questions, such as what variety of olives do you use?
Yeah, the olives in my garden, I'll see if I can remember them all. I have that one that I showed in the beginning that's called Skylark. It's really worth looking up. Not very common.
Can I just interrupt a minute? Sorry, I think that question, Maggie, if I'm right, came from Kirsten, and I think
it did, yes.
It was from one of the ground studio projects, not the garden. I think it was quite beyond.
Gotcha.
I mean, Kirsten's there, so she can probably.
Yeah, that'd be good.
But anyway, it's valid anyway. Obviously, what kind of olives are they making fruit, these olives, or are they chosen for ornament?
Most of the ones we use are fruitless, although we have done working olive ranches as well, where they're doing production olive. Most of the ones we use in gardens, particularly near paving, etc., we've done more fruitless. Kirsten, did you want to ask that question? I'll leave that to you.
Hi, Bernard. Nice to see you. Yeah, I'm curious about the fruitless olive that you use, like that Elena project, I think is the one in the Bay Area. Those olives are very close to the house and near pavement, and I just wondered what variety you had used there.
Yep, and they're similar to the ones I've used on my own property too. We've mostly used Wilsoni. We do use the Swan Hill variety sometimes. And then I use a lot of, the dwarf olives as well. And then Skylark, I think, is fruitless as well, as far as I can tell. I love that one. Can't say enough good things about Skylark.
And does it get, if you let it go and don't prune it compactly, is it a pretty shape and a nice sized tree, or is it a dwarf?
No, it gets pretty big. I think on the nursery listing, I want to say they say 12 to 15 feet, and I think it could get even bigger than that.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. That's good to know. Real quick, do you have an edible variety of olive that you recommend if someone wants to actually grow and harvest the olives?
Everyone we have worked with on doing production olives has kind of gone on that, the Nan McAvoy, do you know McAvoy Ranch?
Yes.
Has gone that way where she went to Italy and so they're using 5 varieties plus. That's consistently what I've seen, not single varieties.
Okay.
If that answers your question. Yeah.
I'll visit there sometime. Yeah.
Oh, it's worth visiting. The history walk is great.
Okay.
Okay, so if we move on to the next topic, there were several people that were interested in where you place gravel in the garden, the surroundings to the paths and plantings and so on. And what do you do to prevent weeds growing in the gravel or the grasses that you planted seeding through into the gravel?
That is a really good question. And one, I will say I've never used a fabric, like the fabrics that people put down and then they cut into it. I've just always, on the pathways that we do, I've done it in the Beth Chatto way. When you look at her gravel garden, she puts the base rock where the pathways are, like a very solid base where it's not easy for weeds to come through. You still will get some. And then she seamlessly runs into her planting directly over the top of the soil. And I've always done it that way. I've never used the fabrics. So I'll be honest with you, I just weed.
Okay.
That's every garden we've ever done. We have the maintenance to weed. I don't like using synthetic, crappy, all that stuff just fails eventually. There's all the plastic paving that people do with gravel. Not a fan. No. I like to just go back to the way it's done through history. I look at Europe and I go, I copied you guys and you didn't use all that crap in the past.
Yeah, fair
Let's
enough.
not
Weeding is a great gardening task to do. A very specific question that relates to some new ruling in California that you can't plant in the space next to the buildings. And the question was, what are you doing in your design work so that the areas around the homes don't look so bleak?
That's another super relevant question at the moment. And we are in a really interesting spot as far as the regulatory process, because I've been working in jurisdictions where you have to come up with defensible zones for fire, fuel management zones, like as in how much fuel, how much dead wooding, how much laddering for fire. But most of that has been in rural situations up until now. And as you know, more recent fires have gone into urban areas. And that one's tough to talk to, because if you think about it, that goes back to a whole master planning, communities, And now we're sort of dealing with an existing fabric of urban situations where you never would have expected fire to jump to. And then that goes back to what's the management of the urban interface with the wildlands. I could go on, and in fact, I'm giving a talk on this, but to be honest, the ruling where there's one ruling at the moment, at least in most jurisdictions, where they're saying there has to be a 5-foot area of gravel from the building out to a point. And I'm just thinking, what does that do? Because it really comes down to building materials. I think the number one thing that I'm looking at with architects is the building materials is incredibly important. I'd say that's number one. And then we work out from there in zones. We work to managing a defensible space, which you saw on many of those projects I showed. And then you work with management, like for instance, in Santa Lucia Preserve, we're managing with a conservancy within 150 feet of the building, the native or indigenous plantings. And then the other things are accessibility for firefighters, et cetera. So this whole 5-foot thing or clearing, when did humans want to live with cleared? So there's this real paradox or contrast with thinking. And I would be really interested to sit down with other leading people in California and talk about this, because the regulations really need to be rethought because also we're being told to use less water. So it's less water, more indigenous plants, or more appropriate plants. And you know what that means? They're often from fire ecologies, if I'm honest. And then you are dealing with, I'll do a 5-foot space at the building. The fire's jumping across 5 feet, if I'm honest. Unless anyone has another opinion, I'm a little lost with that one. I think we need to think bigger.
Bernard, I'm in Los Angeles and not that far from where the Altadena fires happened. And, they're all realizing now. And one of the curators up at the Huntington put it in print not too long ago. He lost his house. A lot of the old growth trees did fine. And now the Army Corps of Engineer, if they see the slightest damage, they go in and cut them down. And now they're getting sued for doing this. And that's how the whole thing keeps spiraling out of control. But they realized too, with an awful lot of these fires, those embers and those kinds of winds were shooting like missiles from one house to another. The plants had nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. So it's like, let's blame the plants again, It's ridiculous. For anybody who had, I suppose, extremely lush shrubs or anything as foundation plants right up to the building, that could be a little bit of a problem. You can avoid that. But it's ludicrous. You're absolutely right. The whole thing needs to be completely rethought, totally rethought. And it's sad because there's old oak trees that came out fine, and the Army Corps of Engineer, if they saw the slightest scar, went in and started taking some of these trees down. And they came up fine.
Well,
Even
honestly, you can sort of thank you for those comments, because we are in a place where actually radical change could start to occur, because two things have happened that I know of. There was the fire that went from Calistoga into the neighborhoods of Santa Rosa. I forget how many years that was, 5+. That went into lawns. It was just into a suburban area that nobody ever thought could burn. And then I was in Pacific Palisades having lunch 1 week before the fires, and I didn't know that could happen. So I'm learning as I go, and I'm just in the same boat, and I feel so sorry for people and their family situations. But yeah, we do need to think on a bigger level, and I would love to be part of that in some way, because there's so many different scenarios in California, and we've been thinking of it truthfully from a landscape architecture perspective as the rural houses were the ones in danger. And now we're jumping those. So yeah, we need different tools for people to use, at least in the planning and regulatory process, and in collaboration with the architects on the building materials is a huge one.
Okay.
Thanks, Carolyn.
So going from an unanswerable question to a very specific.
If I could just add something to what Bernard just said, in the Oakland Hills fire, my wife and I were dealing with some clients on Alvarado Road. It was the last house standing on that edge of the fire. It had a slate roof, and there were a number of firefighters who had come into the area and they never got mobilized. They charged up this road, broke the line, because everybody was so crazy and busy. And they saw this slate roof and they thought, this is where we're going to make our stand. And it was the most defensible house in the neighborhood. It still exists. And now the rest of the neighborhood burned down. And now new homes have been built. The material is questionable, and they're bigger footprints than ever before. So there's more mass in these hillside areas. On the street's the same. It's just as narrow and difficult to evacuate, in an emergency. I mean, it's so frustrating to see. And there was a lot of people talking, but about what to do, but ultimately, I don't know.
So what's driving that money? Is it property developers? I mean, it's at the end of the day that's what they're selling is property.
Well, it is true.
You can't make it smaller to make the road wider, because money's involved and it's private money. And
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a very large. Can we go something very small in our garden?
This is a very specific question. How do you keep the aeonium so short? This is Paola, and actually I have the same experience. Mine grow tall and leggy.
Right. You know what I do? And I treat them all a little differently. I have such a wide range. Or when I say all a little differently, I should say there's probably like 2 or 3 categories of how I treat them. So what I do, for instance, with Zwartkop is I have always not liked the way it just stretches up and they're all the same height. So what I do is I do like I'm doing a forest, I do a multi-generational where I cut cuttings off them and stick them at the base of one of the tall plants each year. Then I do a medium the next year, so they kind of layer like a little forest. And then with some of the other varieties, like what's one? Some of the green varieties like canary ants and things like that, I sometimes go through about every 3 to 5 years and just cut them to the ground, poke a few in, but they'll often just come back. So I'm pretty rough with them, to be honest, but I don't like that leggy look either on certain ones of them.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Very helpful. Does such a proliferation of flora in your garden attract a diversity of fauna?
Yes. Well, we were talking before the talk about birds. I'm always seeing the migrational birds because Point Lobos, just south of me here, is one of those spots to go and just every day be a little different. And then some of them will pass through my garden as well. So definitely birds. And that's pretty much a daily occurrence of breathtaking. And I noticed I have some rabbits in here at the moment. I have deer at the bottom of the property. There's been mountain lions filmed at neighbors' properties. I'm sort of on that urban edge, if that makes sense. I have an 1.5 acres here, which I was just lucky to find. So I definitely have things coming into my garden that some of my neighbors don't. It is a bit of a green belt here.
Okay. Going to your own garden, there's a comment about this is Jacqueline, who preferred your own garden to some of the others that you showed us. But she said, why do you use more natural grass type gardens in your designing, but your own garden has all those lovely shades of green and olives and succulents and everything else?
I have to tell a funny story. I got a client here. I had a client here stay at my guest house, and we were kind of doing one of those more grassy gardens for him, Big Sur, over 10 years ago. And he stayed in my guest house. He goes, "Why can't I have what you have?" So we adapted it to become this as sort of a combination of a grassy garden meets my garden. And it turned out really, really well. You'll see it on my website. It's called Pfeiffer Ridge. And so I agree with you. I just don't feel like there's the projects that to me are out in the open landscape and directly connected to the indigenous landscape, like some of it. So I get the privilege of going to some of those properties. And I really like Santa Lucia Preserve because 90% of the land is left in a conservancy that the clients have no say in, and 10% of the land is developed. And the clients, there's 300 homes, and the clients or the owners pay for the conservancy of the land. So I like that method. And I get to be sort of part of this, giving them these enclosed spaces or small garden areas, but also interfacing with the wildlands. And for me, I just can't imagine putting my garden out there. It's just the way I feel, honestly.
About
But I hear what you're
location.
saying. I hear what you're saying. A lot of people do ask that question. Why don't you do more of this?
Isn't it also about scale? I mean, some of those things
Yeah.
that we were looking at was just mighty, scale.
Right.
I don't know.
So there's a question about what maintenance needs do you suggest after you've designed a garden in terms of manpower?
Yeah, on the grassier ones, on the ones that you're describing, a lot of that is kind of cowboy. The first year is tricky, particularly if we're seeding, but after that, it's a lot of what I'd call cowboy maintenance of mowing at the right times to avoid annual weeds. A lot of knowing when not to touch it at all on those. So those are intense management at certain times of year, then leave it. We do no fertilization on those or anything like that. It is just left the way it is left. And on my own garden, again, I've never used a chemical, never fertilized anything. So a lot of it is these extreme cutbacks, like the question earlier about aeoniums. I might intensely work on one plant every 3 to 5 years. And other than that, it's mostly weeding.
Okay, great. So we're coming back to this topic of wildfires and so on. There's a question about, have you got a list of your top 25 resistant plants? And a question about whether you're still incorporating flammable plants like rosemary in your plantings.
Rosemary is incorporating rosemary on my ground studio projects. Does that mean?
Yes, I think that's the intention.
Okay. I will always use rosemaries. I don't think you'll be able to keep me away from those. And here, one really beautiful thing, as the Northern Californians know, is the ceanothus flowers coincide with a lot of the rosemary flowers. So, and then the echiums start to flower a little later. They're about to flower now. And I know echiums kind of have a bad rap as far as their weediness, but on my own property, again, I choose to manage them and thin them out so I don't just let them go. So yeah, the rosemaries I absolutely love Tuscan blue. I think is one of the best plants ever for us. Its form, and then when it flowers. And then I also really love, there's one called Ken Taylor I really love. And then there was an introduction called Bull that I think was an introduction from Europe that Dave Frost at Native Sons brought in. So yes, I'll always use the rosemaries. I just love them. And they also just give this, they just combine well with the succulents and give that nice structured look when you've got too many succulents together. And then the fire, I mean, the obvious answer to some of this as far as directly around the house, I would say I believe the grassland California meadow plants, I've had a lot of success with defensible zones around houses. So I would say there's many of those, particularly caryxes and fescues, caryxes in particular. And then a lot of the succulents too, I feel are really good. Where it gets tricky is when we start bringing in some of our manzanitas. There's a lot of highly flammable California plants here as well, but a lot of it is how you manage them. A lot of it is taking the dead wood out of them. If they're unmanaged, I would say they're kindling, some of them, if I'm honest. So I'm a big fan of what we call fuel modification in our plans here, as in managing the dead wood in our trees and our shrubs, I think is huge. And it's sort of an easy way to reduce fire risk, in my opinion.
Okay, so still on the topic of fire, is there any suggestion for literature about creating fire protected gardens?
It's funny you ask. I was looking yesterday for myself, and one website that I found that I think has really good literature that you can build off is go to the San Marcos Growers Nursery website in Santa Barbara. And there's a section, I think it's like, you'll have to find it, but it's a section where it shows a whole list of plants for different uses. And if you look closely, you'll see one is listed as fire. I would strongly recommend looking at the links on that page, and you can grow from there, because with each of those links is another link, if that makes sense.
Okay. A question now about us as amateur gardeners who don't have a budget to commission such wonderful designers as yourself. Do you have any advice for us?
Yeah, don't use a designer. Some of the best gardens I've seen in the world weren't designed by landscape architects. So one thing I've always been interested in, I've seen it as a common theme throughout the world, is people who come from other creative backgrounds who don't know the gardening rules. So Derek Jarman, just an example, is Nicole DeVessians also in that category. So I would just say the examples are there where they broke rules. They had other creative influences, very important. I think when we live in a bubble of gardeners who are starting to grow the same plants as each other and starting to do the same thing, it gets boring really quickly. So if I think of it like the architecture, fine art, or design world, the best things that have happened have been the person who was told you can't do it that way. So I'd say, yeah, do your thing.
Do our thing. Great.
Yeah.
What was the vegetation on your property when you moved in?
It was pretty barren. Let me see if I can find something and share screen again. Let me see. Might not find it easily here, but it was more of a blank slate, what I would call a blank slate, than you would imagine. There wasn't a lot going on. Can I share back screen or not?
Yes, you should be able to.
All right.
Yep.
Go back to that. Zoom. There it is. Too many layers. Whoops. Here we go. So this is a photo from above the house. So yeah, you can see I had to completely remodel the house, and you can see there's one eucalyptus tree there. There's some oaks in the distance. So the whole property was like that, frankly. And that was about, I think it's coming on about 13 years. Do you all see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have this whole before section. Yeah, you can see there what it looked like. Here's it in construction with the steps. You know, when I said the plants were tiny for years, they truly were. Like, that's what the upper slope looked like. It was embarrassing. I didn't invite clients over. So yeah, it was a bit of a blank slate, frankly. It's hard for me to even remember that it was that bare. So, but that's been the best part of it. Like, I'm sure all of your gardens is, you know, it's just time, and it's celebrating time and not rushing it too much and learning from it. Like, there's nothing else like gardening. And then, of course, there's no other art form that has, and I don't know that I would call gardening and garden design an art form. I think in some cases it is, but there's no other one that has the fourth dimension of death. So we have to deal with death of plants and then starting over. And that's happened many times here.
Yeah, for all of us, I think. There's two bits of information for those interested again in this issue about fire. Excellent book on firescaping is Firescaping Your Home by Adrian Edwards and Rachel Schlager. And resilientlandscapescoalition.org is a great website for fire resilient landscaping. There's also a recommendation about an olive tree that apparently has white edible fruit, so it's very attractive, and it's grown in Italy, and it's called Leucocarpa. And I think we've just about got to the bottom of the questions. There are about a zillion comments that say how wonderful the presentation was and how inspired people are by all the images that you've shown them. So thank you for that.
Which I will share with you, Bernard. So I send that through to Bernard, and I can also put those books onto the plant list, and I'll send that out tomorrow. Rather than wait, I'll just do that. So we'll get, you guys will get the plant list that Bernard very kindly has sent me. I had one question, if I may, and maybe there may be just other people who want to talk. What's your bottom temperature? You talked about your top temperature, but how low do you go? You don't go.
Yeah, I'll stay in Fahrenheit. I grew up metric in Australia, and so I've just had to just drop all of that out of my head. But yeah, our bottom here is around, in Carmel, would be around between 25 and 30. And but some of the projects we work on that I showed you, there's a couple there that have pretty extreme, where they go down to around, there's one in particular, I think it goes down to around 16 degrees Fahrenheit and 116 in the summer is their high. So we do work on a lot of properties that just have that, how we balancing between those two things. Carmel, not so much. It's probably like my low here is probably high 20s, and the hottest day last year, I think at my house, was about 92, which is really unusual. Like 80 would normally be a hot day.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to ask something to Bernard? Right, I think then we can wrap it up with great appreciation and thanks, and see you soon, hopefully somewhere in one of these wonderful landscapes or gardens.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks for being with us, everybody. Nice to see you all. See you next month.